Bruce, tell us a little bit about, your life your life behind the camera,
Okay.
like
Um,
it started and all that stuff.
well, it started. My dad, my dad was a photographer, so it was kind of in my blood. But then he was mostly shooting weddings and bar mitzvahs and family portraits, but he did a little bit of everything, which is what people did back then. And so it was in my blood, but I didn't know that that's really what I wanted to do. But somehow I ended up at a commercial art school, Art Center College of Design in LA,
Mhm.
and studied commercial photography. And so I did that, and I, ended up with a Bachelor of Fine Arts, which is hanging in my wall, but nobody's ever asked me to ever have to see that. But I worked very briefly full time for a fashion photographer in LA before I moved east. But then I knew ultimately I wanted to go to New York where the action was and not be a wedding and bar mitzvah and portrait photographer, but be a commercial photographer. So to deal with commercial clients, not private clients. And so I started out in New York, looked around a little bit for a full-time assisting job there because that's the best way to learn, but never really came up with anything of interest. So I started freelancing, and I freelanced for a few very top um, fashion photographers mostly, and a few who were probably more influential in terms of me starting with my own clients that were not necessarily so successful and famous, but were very nice and shared a lot with me. So I learned a lot. I worked very briefly full time for a fashion photographer in LA before I moved east. But then I knew ultimately I wanted to go to New York where the action was and not be a wedding and bar mitzvah and portrait photographer, but be a commercial photographer. But I got my own studio when the business really started in '79. Of course, for all my commercial years, I was shooting on film.
Uh-huh.
I would shoot a lot of medium format, which was my Hasselblad. So it produced either a negative or more often a transparency, like a slide that was 2¼ square. That was my particular camera. Um, I didn't really shoot with larger formats, which we referred to when it was a 4x5 or an 8x10 camera. That was more geared for still life photographers. So a lot of my work was in the studio, although sometimes I'd go on location.
Yeah.
And then the first experience I had with digital, or it might have overlapped with me getting my first digital camera, but the first real experience with digital was there was this company I heard about, my friends heard about, called that was formed by a guy named Jim Kiefer, I believe his name was. Um, and he formed a company called Pictage, Pictage, Pictage.com. So initially, we could either send our film to him, and he would have it processed and scan it, or we would do what I believe I did. No, I think I might have done that actually. Or you could have it processed locally and send the negatives out to him.
Mm-hmm.
Either way, you were living kind of dangerously because you were sending your film or your negatives, original negatives, cross country to California. They would then post it on their site. They were using their own servers at the time. And so essentially the film became digital.
So they converted your film into digital
They scanned it all and they
uh-huh.
posted it on their site, which I could then share with my clients.
With a private link to your clients,
Yeah.
essentially. And then they could go through that. So in a lot of ways, that was the first really big shift in how your clients got to see your work.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
So Pictage really changed the industry.
And it was brilliant initially because not only that, but they formed these groups all around the country called PUG groups, PUG, Pictage user groups. And there was one in Connecticut, there was one in New York, there was one in LA, there was one in Chicago. They were all over the country. and they were formed by these groups of people that were all starting to use Pictosh. So they did brilliant marketing. And so we would meet maybe once a month. And that's how I met people that are now, some of whom are still my friends here in Connecticut, a couple in New York, that are wedding photographers. And it changed the whole business. When I first started doing the wedding business in Connecticut, I didn't know anybody that was doing weddings, or at least that was doing them in the photojournalistic style I was hoping to do them in. All of a sudden, I met all these people. And so we would meet every month and maybe talk about Pictosh or not. We would have different subjects.
It's a social network. It was a community.
And then they started doing these annual conventions, which I started going to. So I had a couple different business programs that I used. In the beginning, it was probably paper, print,
right.
Typed it out or printed it out and sent. But I had one called Successware, which I didn't like, which was an online business program. But then I started using this thing called, which I still use, which I'm probably not going to use for much longer, called ShootQ, which was an early online thing that I could do everything online.
Specialized for the photography business.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And it allowed you to show them how many things you printed. I mean, I presume it had all the features.
It worked. It was separate from, it wasn't integrated with Pictosh in any way. So
Right.
It was just my business database of my clients, and we create a shoot on them, and then they could provide information for the shoot that I was going to need to know.
So it was really how you interacted with your clients.
Oh yeah, it was great.
What did you call it? Shoot
Q. So shoot and then the letter Q. Ironically or not, eventually it was bought by Pictosh. My first camera was a Fuji camera, which used Nikon lenses. So it was a really early Fuji digital camera. I don't know if you know the story, but Kodak actually invented the first digital camera. You probably knew that, but then they lost the motivation. Yeah, they lost the
because they didn't really, because it was.
They didn't think it was real.
It was going to cannibalize their business.
Yeah.
And so film was so profitable for them.
Unbelievable. Oh my God.
And how fast did it decline was incredible too.
Incredible. So Fuji, I was able to use. So I started shooting with it, and it was okay, but it wasn't great. So I can't remember how long I did it, but at some point maybe I was. What was I? And I shot for a little while. I started shooting all digital, still up, and then I could upload it to Pictosh. Right. So I didn't have to send film across country. So at some point I made that transition. And it wasn't great quality. It was good quality, but it wasn't great. And at some point I then switched to Canon. And I can't give you the exact history of when the cameras started getting much better, but they just started, the megapixels became greater. When digital, even when I started shooting 35 millimeter instead of medium format, when I started shooting events that way, in the very beginning, I briefly shot a little bit of both, but shot medium format. When you started shooting 35 millimeter, you became much more free. And in fact, people coined this term wedding photojournalism, which I don't know if that was a new term or whatever, but it was the photojournalist, this guy Dennis Reggie, who was a famous wedding photographer, says he claims he coined the term, but I don't know if that's true. But we started thinking more like a photojournalist and started shooting at a looser, more documentary style. And 35 millimeter allowed us to do that. And then digital really allowed us to do that.
So fewer pose stuff, much more candid, much more flowing.
Yeah.
And digital really enabled.
Still doing the pose stuff, but shooting a much looser way.
But the mix between posed and candid changed dramatically, right?
Dramatically, yes. Yeah. The first thing that you do when you come home from a wedding is you upload them to your own computers, to your own server, if you will.
Your local server, essentially.
Her drives, my external hard drives, of which have several sources that they automatically upload to. And they're raw files, meaning they're not JPEGs. They're larger files that are, have much more information in them. So my camera shoots raw files. So what happens is you download them to your computer, and then you bring them into one of the Adobe programs like Lightroom that I use, or some other programs, and you then make your selects. So you don't upload 5,000 images. You narrow it down to maybe 1,000. And once you got 1,000 images, then you would go in that same software and you color correct them, because right out of the camera, they maybe look really good, but you'd have tremendous flexibility with Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever to make them look great. Because before you upload them, you want them to be as perfect, not retouched, but as perfect exposure-wise, color-wise, otherwise, ready to be ordered as a print.
Okay, so now you're in the digital age. You're taking if you got a shooter with you, you might have 5,000 images to cull through. Color correction is through Adobe
Lightroom.
And then, so that's kind of where it's been now, right? The state of this whole thing until this AI thing comes along, right? Tell me what you've learned about how AI is being applied in this space, and give us a sense of what you think it would have saved you time-wise over those 1,000 events.
Well, I think, my buddy Jason probably described it best.
Yeah, well,
because I've never used AI in any way.
Yeah. But tell us what Jason.
So I think the two main reasons that people are using it is, number one, you download all this, you upload to your own computer your 5,000 images. My understanding is one aspect of AI will go through all those images and take out closed eyes, take out, I don't know, total duplication probably. Like if you're doing a portrait, I believe, again, I've never used it. I believe, I might shoot 20 pictures of a group.
Right.
And all you really need are 10, but you want them all with eyes open. So it would eliminate the ones but you might also be able to program it. I'm assuming. I know there's things you can just tell it to do.
Take out any with closed eyes.
Yeah, that, but also pick the best of them, or pick 5 best or 10 best. I don't know what it can do, but obviously could do whatever you tell it to do.
Yeah.
So that's the initial thing, is the editing, to narrow it down, which sounds like it can be really quick. Whereas I would spend, I'll combine my things. I was really slow. I would spend easily a day, maybe longer, editing and color correcting my images, right? Potentially.
And now, from what Jason has said to you, that's taking,
I guess, minutes.
I mean, think about that, right?
Yeah. He runs the entire thing through Aftershoot, which is one of these programs.
So that's an AI.
Yeah. I call down using photos that have already been adjusted. I don't know what he means by that. Already adjusted for color. He talks about it being, for him, more valuable with portrait sessions for some reason, which he explained. But I know people use it for weddings.
Right. So
I think he just doesn't completely trust the culling process, that they're going to leave out things that he really wanted. Yeah, as early as I could, I developed a website. I don't even remember what year that was, but a very early Flash website.
And did you build it, or did you have it built?
No, through a company that did that, who may or may not still be in business. I can't remember, but it was pretty effective. But you had to bring people to the website, obviously. Yeah. So I think initially, the bar mitzvahs kind of took on a life of their own, because I put ads in the local temple bulletin or whatever, and people started calling, and then word of mouth.
Yeah.
As you can imagine. Weddings was a little still word of mouth. I put an ad in the local magazine, I think, and for some reason I started getting weddings in New York. So I must have put an ad in something in New York. I don't know what it was, but I started getting some. I still had an office in the city, so I started getting some work there. Um, and then I hooked up with a wedding planner or two in Connecticut, because that's really where I wanted to do most of the work, because that's where I was living. And it just sort of took off. And then, one bride would recommend to the next bride and all that. And so that was, and I still was placing print ads in this very expensive little print ads in Westport magazine, and then some other magazine that would give me a full page ad in exchange for doing some photography for them. So I was still doing some print, but it really was starting to transition to, more online.
Yeah.
And then I started dabbling in blogging.
Yeah. Did you ever buy ads, online ads, or search?
Maybe a little bit, but very little.
Uh-huh.
But very little. And and the key, which I didn't do very well, but when I got rid of the Flash site, for numerous reasons. So then I had a guy design using a template that a company sold us, but he then did it. And then it became all about SEO.
Yeah.
So he kind of gave me all the background of what I had to do to create better SEO.
Right.
And I never did it well. I never did it well, but I did, move up in the rankings.
Yeah.
So I tried my best, especially with the blogging, but even on the website, to create better SEO. So it was all about that, which I found a pain in the ass. But
yeah,
I was.
Did you ever look to use an outside firm to do your SEO work? Did you ever try it?
I only used the guy that created the website. Helped me with that a little bit,
but not a real.
I don't think I ever hired anybody besides that to do that. Yeah, digital camera.
Digital camera.
Yeah, by far. AI may make it quicker. The last part of what Jay put in there, or one of the last part, is kind of a key factor, which is in retouching. Did you see those little pictures he did?
I did. Yeah.
That's where it's going to transform what you can do. In terms of what the photographer can do with his image in AI, with using other elements or whatever, other than retouching out something you don't want in there.
Right.
From my perspective, it's not going to really change things dramatically, because, if a photographer starts using AI to create images that he hadn't created, it's going to be a different world, and it's not going to be
photography anymore.
Not going to be photography, and the bride's not going to want that.
Right.
From my old man perspective.
Yeah. But
nobody,
But as you shared with me, to get the fence out of the picture, the bride will definitely want that.
2 seconds. And what Jay said, because he was referencing this location that he and I have shot at 1,000 times in Westport. And they put up this ugly fence, and they took away all the trees, and it's always a challenge to shoot in that. You have to shoot in that one direction because of the light most of the day. And so the perfect solution, he can just take out that fence and put in trees in 1 second, and it looked totally real. He's just essentially, you could do that in Photoshop, but it would be a project. And now in Photoshop, you can do it with it. He may be doing it in Photoshop, I don't know, but with AI.
But now it's instant. It's almost instantaneous.
I guess.
He may play around with it for a couple of seconds, but
I
it
think
will take a while.
Yeah. So that's really a big transformation.
So would you say
time and editing, and time in terms of editing?
Do you think that you don't think we'll get to a point where there are no photographers? Because I guess you could set up a camera and tell a machine to shoot, right? If it was stationary.
Yeah, weddings are a unique beast because it's constantly moving.
Yeah.
Constantly changing. It's light. You got to be conscious of the light being nice and attractive. But
I guess AI could figure that out.
Yeah. Ironically, there's a whole trend that's been going on for a while where some wedding photographers, and they sell themselves as such, are shooting film. Some very high, very well paid, successful photographers shoot part of the day on film. And because it just has a certain look or whatever, but it's almost a gimmick from my perspective, but it works. It's a selling tool, and they like the look of it. It's maybe softer or whatever, but you can simulate that in Photoshop, quite honestly. So I don't want anything to do with that. But my point being that I think traditional photography at a wedding, I won't say forever, but for some time to come, is going to be still very constant.
Yeah.
Maybe you can edit it quicker, or you can take out the tree, but that's just my own.
But that gives the photographer time to do something else,
Right?
To do more marketing.
Yep.
And maybe if you weren't culling and color correcting your SEO, you would have spent more time on ramping up your SEO. But what would your father, may he rest in peace?
Oh yeah.
What would he say about all that's gone on in this business?
He would love it. Well, he saw me making the transition to digital, so he was there for that. He's only been gone 7 years. In fact, he bought his own little digital camera, and he was posting things online and all that. He was totally into it. I mean, this is a guy who taught himself photography. He thought it was great. So he would be blown away by it. He would think it was totally cool. I think. I'm sure. Yeah. I'm blown away by it.